All right. Well, I will call our work session to order. My name is Donald Weich. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. We will start off with a period of public comment. Manager Kelly, do we have remote participants?
We do. There are currently no hands raised.
If you'd like to address the Planning Commission at this time, you can raise your hand and you will be permitted to speak for 3 minutes. This is the only public, nope, there's one at the end. All right, with that, I will move us on to two presentations. So I want to thank planning staff for working with me to invite our guests tonight to our work session. And I want to thank the Planning Commission for joining us tonight for these two presentations. A couple months ago, I was invited to sit in on some master students of urban design studios, and I received three presentations, which I thought were really, really interesting. And I immediately emailed planning staff to see if it would be possible for us to share a bit of those presentations with you. And everything worked out, albeit the technical challenges that we've had to get here some 15 minutes late this evening. So thanks for bearing with us. So tonight we're going to hear presentations from the University of Michigan Master Student Design students whose work explore housing, stormwater, and livability challenges in Ann Arbor. The three student teams working on projects located mostly on the north side and one in Central Campus will share design concepts developed this semester under their faculty guidance. And so when I saw these presentations, I just thought, oh, the thing that I hope will come through for you all, especially in their PDF that's attached, was the active network presentation part that they presented, because there was just a lot of work that the students did sort of showing how things worked together. So we have their professor with us tonight, Gabriel uh, Cuellar, who is going to introduce himself, the design studio, and the students, and then kick off the presentations. Gabriel,
Thank you
you
so
have to
much,
unmute. Okay, great.
Mr. Weich.
You're welcome.
I'm going to share my screen, which should just be a kind of black screen with white text. Is that what you all see? Okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Gabriel Cuellar, a faculty member at the Tallman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. I've had the pleasure to be supervising this course of Master of Urban Design students this semester. It's the first semester for this group of students. Almost all of them are coming from abroad. And so we have a diverse background in this group, which I think has contributed to having a unique perspective on Ann Arbor, and one that has cultivated a lot of curiosity for the city, its development trajectory, and the role of urban design in defining its future. As urban designers, we are somewhere between architecture and urban planning. So you'll see that we are constantly navigating between these in the projects that we'll present. These are the students you see listed here. And Ann Arbor has been lauded as one of the most livable cities in the US, but this livability is not experienced by all. And key issues such as housing, hydrology, and the relationship with the university will continue to present challenges now and in the future. The current debate around the comprehensive plan has raised urban design issues to the public consciousness, with different organizations and different attitudes envisioning different kinds of futures for the city. The students were tasked with making sense of this current situation in Ann Arbor in several ways, studying, for example, urban regulation, the dynamics of property, inequities as they are found in social and ecological dimensions, documenting conditions on the ground, applying a systems thinking, which Mr. Weich commented on, and critically also developing design proposals that somehow reflected their insights, reflected their interests, to develop new ways of thinking about the city that would be more just and more um, accounting for all of these different issues that are happening. So the students are presenting the videos, which we'll see how it works. Hopefully it will work well. There's three different groups. They have been working in teams. You can see their names here and the different countries that they're coming from and the several projects that they have been developing. They'll each present themselves very quickly, and then we can shift to the audio, to the video. So we can start with the watershed one, which I think you have already prepped on the files. So I'll quickly rotate the screen, and Carolyn and Minza will present themselves, and then we can go from there.
I think before we do that, Gabriel, I think the preference was that you share the video and then the audio in the room because then you can time it yourself.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Okay, great.
So this also can.
Okay. Yes, please go for it.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Larson and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
And I am Minza Shahid. I'm from India, and we will today be talking about how we have studied the relationship between Ann Arbor and the Huron River watershed, and what ecological implications it has on the city, what is the human relation with the watershed, and everything around that.
So our video aims to highlight how the historical, social, environmental context of the watershed relates to Ann Arbor's largest zoning use, residential zoning.
Yes.
So please enjoy our video and we look forward to any questions and comments.
Okay.
Okay, we'll start the video in just one moment.
3, 2, 1.
The city of Ann Arbor, Michigan is located within the Huron River watershed. In parks and trails, the community interacts with the watershed in healthy, visible ways. However, in spaces we don't normally associate with water, stormwater is hidden underground in pipes, surfaces are impermeable, and detention ponds are engineered and inert. But what would it look like if we treated the water that lands here with the same amount of stewardship as the water that lands here? As the city of Ann Arbor develops its new comprehensive plan, disagreements over zoning strategies have emerged between pro-density advocates and neighborhood preservation groups. Considering the broader environmental, social, and historical context of this debate could help guide decision makers. The Anishinaabe have lived in southeast Michigan for centuries and used these lands around the Great Lakes for hunting and gathering. They call the water Nibby and understand it as life itself and not just a commodity to be used. When European settlers arrived, the colonists divided up the land with the Jeffersonian grid with no regard for natural features. Ann Arbor's industrialization and residential development has led to degraded water quality, destroyed habitat, and increased sediment load in the watershed. In addition to the history, assessing the current stakeholder network was key to developing any design solutions. Ann Arbor is primarily zoned for residential uses, especially low-density single-family residential, or R1 zoning. Currently, the city requires developers to meet specific stormwater management requirements. In most cases, developers meet the requirements through engineered solutions that socially and environmentally disconnect the community and the land from the role in the watershed. Adjusting development requirements could transform R1 zoning neighborhoods from places of social and environmental disconnection to places of connection. As a case study, we selected the North Sky neighborhood, a single-family residential neighborhood in Northwest Ann Arbor. This development was built in 2018 and is largely characterized by its car-centric form, uniform homes, two-car garages, and expanses of lawn. Like most R1 developments in Ann Arbor, the stormwater is treated via engineered swales and retention ponds, undergrounded stormwater management, and monocultures of lawn.
Manicured lawns have become a symbol of home ownership in the United States. However, these lawns require substantial irrigation, contribute to water pollution by chemical use, and lack habitat for local pollinators. Our first strategy gradually transforms these lawns into an ecological patchwork of rain gardens. Like many urban developments in Ann Arbor, a homeowners association currently maintains the turf throughout the neighborhood. To implement the first strategy, the HOA will transform the lawns to rain gardens within all community shared spaces, while leaving a small area of lawn in the community park for children to play. Our strategy includes having public gardens, rain garden curbs, and shared vegetation along with traditional grass conversion. This will lead to lower irrigation costs, stormwater credits, and better aesthetics, inspiring other neighbors. As the ecological patchwork grows, the community gains biodiversity, healthier soils, and a strong identity connection to the watershed. Our second strategy reimagines stormwater travels throughout the site. As opposed to traditional methods of hiding stormwater in underground pipes and surface drains in the turf, our intervention creates a swale wetland network that also acts as stormwater commons for public use. The corridor decentralizes the runoff and creates moments of interaction with water throughout the site. The infiltration areas absorb more water into the ground, which allows the large retention pond on the south side of the site to become smaller and act as a community public space rather than a fenced-off basin. These community spaces instill this feeling of shared responsibility for the watershed and their local ecology. Our strategy acts in multiple segments with the swale network to guide runoff and community spaces for people to interact more closely with water. Our third strategy provides mobility modifications to encourage alternative modes of transportation and reduce the negative impacts of car centricity. To encourage use of public transit, we propose introducing a new bus stop to routes 22 and 63 at the existing community park. We also recommend adding bike lanes and expanding the existing pedestrian pathways throughout the public spaces. To reduce negative impacts of car centricity, we propose replacing impervious concrete driveways with pervious pavers. Additionally, road choppers will be added at key pedestrian crossings to slow car traffic and beautify the pedestrian spaces. Our final strategy aims to transform R1 bedroom communities into places where daily life happens locally. This strategy could be implemented into future urban developments, but we have reimagined what this would look like within North Sky neighborhood. A neighborhood community center becomes a hub for gathering, workshops, and casual interactions. Small businesses like cafe and corner market anchor walking trips and build social ties. These nodes increase walkability, allow more density, and reconnect residents to the neighborhood community. All of our design strategies can be used individually or as a combined system to reconnect the residents of Ann Arbor with the Huron River watershed. The North Sky neighborhood gives us an opportunity to see the impact of our design and rethink how one residential area can become a model for many. A place where an ecological patchwork, infiltration corridors, mobility modifications, and local night nodes build our connection to the watershed. These scalable strategies reveal what neighborhoods across Ann Arbor can look like when stewardship and watershed guide design.
The next presentation is I will share. You introduce yourselves? Yeah. Okay.
Hello everyone, I'm Pallavi. I'm from Pakistan, Karachi.
I'm Dwanil from India, Mumbai.
Hi, and I'm Mahalij and I'm from Pakistan.
And today we are discussing about the tension that is caused between the university and the city. And we were trying to understand how it is, how the future of the city is developing, and how is university is about to expand. So how can we understand the terms of such development and what impact it has on the Ann Arbor itself? Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, one, two, three.
An arbor is shaped by walls growing side by side, the University of Michigan and the city.
Nope.
Their boundaries
Restart,
overlap
restart.
and divide.
Restart, sorry.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it's not.
Not the start. Yeah, right. What happened? One small, oh, this was trimmed, got trimmed for some reason. Okay. We are back online. Okay, one, two, three.
An arbor is shaped by walls growing side by side, the University of Michigan and the city. Their boundaries collide, overlap, and divide the urban fabric. Our project studies the tension between the city and the university. The timeline shows how the University of Michigan has expanded continuously since arriving in Ann Arbor in 1937. Early land grants and constitution tax exemption allowed the University of Michigan to grow without contributing to the property taxes. Over the decades, more buildings, more students, more jobs, and more services turned the campus into a microcity of its own. But each expansion also meant increasing tax laws for Ann Arbor. With less revenue, the city faces underfunded infrastructure, delayed maintenance, rising pressure on services, and gradual spatial decline. So the university's growth and the city's strain unfold together, and this tension sets the stage for spatial differences that follow. Quality. The university maintains high quality, well serviced environment while the city neighborhoods face lower upgrades and resource gaps. Quantity. The University of Michigan expansion captures more land for academic facilities, reducing the amount of taxable land available to support the city. Scale and car dependency. While the campus students experience a compact macrocity, outside it, Ann Arbor scale stretches out, generating longer commutes and heavy dependency on personal vehicles. Accessibility. The campus is highly walkable and service dense, while many parts of Ann Arbor rely on limited transit and car-oriented routes. Property wealth. As campus demands intensify, surrounding housing becomes more expensive, pushing affordability farther out. This map shows the open and recreational spaces around the city and the houses which have easy access to the spaces. This map shows how the mixed use and commercial spaces of the city are very well developed around the University of Michigan. Even the bus transit circuits are very well developed around the university. This diagram makes visible how divided infrastructure is within the system and influencing the planning decisions, shaping the future, expansion, and accelerating the suburbanization instead of strengthening the urban core. If such differences in developing the infrastructure continues, it would completely change the current type of morphology of Ann Arbor, making it completely lean on the university campus for its growth. We have done a case study of University of Cambridge, which is scattered throughout the city to create vibrant urban experience. As you walk, you can see thoughtful design elements like rain gardens, improved walkability to promote community life. In contrast, University of Michigan feels much more monumental. Cambridge, by comparison, feels much more human-scaled with the university. By understanding the system and taking inspiration from our case study, our concept is to scatter university across the city. The purple dots represent proposed university sites placed in transition corridor identified in Ann Arbor's future city plan, which ensures our proposal aligns with the city's long-term vision. If we talk about the system again, we have introduced new actors into the system like civic engagement body to ensure an agreement between university and city, civic commons, urban well-being, mixed-use buildings, and overlay zoning district. The site we have chosen is South Quad area located right beside Michigan Union and Central Campus. The primary roads that connect to the site are Peckett Street and State Street. It is surrounded mostly by small-scale residential buildings, typically 2 to 3 stories, while university buildings are 8 to 9 stories tall. This contrast creates edges that feel abrupt rather than gradual, reducing walkability and making the street experience feel less comfortable or human-scaled. If we look at the plan has 90% of its population of student housing and 10% of private owners, with the parking lot situated in the center. Our vision connects the university and city through three key pieces. The first, the university cluster. We place small thematic, academic, and housing hubs within the neighborhood with public cafes and courtyards, creating positive campus presence where people live. Second, the civic courtyards. At the central intersection, we build a flexible public square for market classes and concerts, neutral ground borders by shared amenities like reading rooms and daycares. Third, the green and social connector. This will be a continuous beautiful pathway with wide sidewalk, bike lanes, and green gardens. The shared ecology spine that ties everything together into connected communities. Our design is powered by four smart zoning tools. Density bonus developers can build taller if they include public courtyards or affordable housing. Neighborhood zoning. Homeowners can add a small shop or rental units, bringing cafes and services to the block. Tax abatement for rehabilitation, renovation, and all building with community spaces, and your property taxes are frozen for 10 years. Stewardship lot incentives. Dedicate part of the lot as a public park and get a permanent tax cut. To make a scattered university model work in Ann Arbor, we have introduced 5 different steps. The first step is creating development agreements where the city and university formally sets the rules for land use. Then university will make sure all the sites are in transition corridor. Instead of buying land outright, the university can then use land leasing. Community benefit agreements ensure that public spaces and affordability are built into every project. And finally, public-private partnerships allow the university, city, and developers to co-create mixed-use buildings. The university can come to different sites across Ann Arbor with its ground floor for mixed-use purposes, and considering the size and scale, it can have different sort of activities, from market pots to seating and food stalls. The package streets will transform from dividing road into a shared heart of community. In phase 1, we will redevelop key sites into new courtyard buildings. These courtyards will house pop-up community pods for workshop exhibits, while the ground floor will become public cafes and exhibition halls, spilling life onto sidewalks. Portable kiosks will arrive, bringing coffee, food, and small market, creating instant energy. We will build the foundation. We will install a dedicated pedestrian promenade protected by lanes. Bicycles will line the street to manage stormwater over time. The city will mature into a resilient ecosystem. The biospheres will grow into lush green gardens. The courtyards will become established community anchors, and the continuous pedestrian-friendly green street will function as primary connection spine, a thriving green corridor where university and the city are seamlessly woven together. The connected system will attract new investment. Underutilized sites along the corridor will transform into mixed-use academic and housing hubs, expanding the university's presence without expanding its footprint. The continuous green network will become the city's national cooling and flood management system. Private yards will link to public biospheres, creating a district-scale watershed. The model will replicate other Ann Arbor neighborhoods will adopt the corridor courtyard toolkit, making the entire city a walkable, resilient, and socially integrated ecosystem.
I think the speed on that one will need to be adjusted for a broader audience to be able to understand. It was a bit fast. I apologize for that. The final presentation
The PI
is presented by Joyce and Tiancheng.
Hi, this is Joyce. I'm from Taiwan.
Hi, I'm Tianchang Li and I'm from China. And my background is urban planning. I'm so glad to have opportunities to work with to focus on Ann Arbor, and it is my first time to think about urban design in a systematic way.
And yes, so we look at the tensions between the students and students living in this monofunctional city. Like Ann Arbor is a student city. About more than 45% of the residents are students. So we look at the student living and the tensions between the student living within the environment. So maybe let's start. Three, two, one.
The PILOT project aims to imagine a student city, a city that truly reflects what students love and need. Our focus is Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of the most livable cities in the United States, also a place fundamentally shaped by the University of Michigan. 45% of the city's residents are students. When we examine Ann Arbor's existing typomorphology, we see 3 dominant components: single-family housing, traditional street retail, and campus tissue. So, what is campus tissue? Brenda K. Shea frames suburban morphology into three categories: campus, static, and elastic tissues. Campus tissue refers to large piece of land. In Ann Arbor, this includes the university academic building, big box retail, as well as the vast monofunctional residential zones, which are the home of the majority of Ann Arbor students. So, where is the tension? Students have limited mobility. They relied almost entirely on public transit to navigate this campus tissue landscape. Students contribute rent, tuition, and sales taxes. However, their daily life, from studying to entertainment, is concentrated along commercial streets and suburban plazas that are difficult to reach. To work with this condition, we propose three tools: citywide student tenants association, shared transportation, zoning change to PUD. A citywide student tenant association helps students organize and advocate for what they truly need. A shared transportation system frees up underused parking and roads. A PUD zoning change allows this space to transform into activity areas and mixed-use programs. Through GIS analysis of Ann Arbor's zoning, we identified key campus tissues. R4 residential areas. R4 is predominantly student housing. However, it contains oversized parking lots, offers only housing tab, and sits far from commercial areas. To explore how a campus tissue site can be reorganized, we select the Valleys of North Star, one of the R4 areas in North Ann Arbor. At first glance, North Star looks ideal: beautiful houses, lawns, and a swimming pool. But beneath these images, we see the real conditions, far from central Ann Arbor with very limited walkability. Highly monofunctional area with enormous amounts of parking, underused landscape within irregular building orientations.
Our strategy, PILOT, Pilot for Integrated Livability-Oriented Transformation. Pilot proposes a multi-layer system of strips, connection, and points. This framework is intentionally broad, a radical pilot project meant to reorganize the pattern of campus tissue to add mobility and livability to this monofunctional environment. By sequencing the design from strips to connection to points, Pilot becomes a framework for rethinking student living in Ann Arbor and restructuring its campus tissue. Layer 1, strips. Large-scale linear bands establish a new framework that overrides the existing subdivision logic of the campus tissue. As continuous landscape grounds, the strip introduce diverse ecological conditions: grass strips as informal play areas, tall native grass bands as habitat, forest strips for shade and topographic mounts, pebble grounds for flexible gathering, and wetland strips that integrate stormwater functions into seasonal water landscape. Together, these bands add spatial character, transforming today's empty open areas into high-quality outdoor environments for student life. Layer 2, connections. A new circulation network spans the strips, forming the primary routes. These connections accommodate everyday movement and emergency access. Permeable and multifunctional, the paths connect directly to parking strips containing about 300 spaces, including shared vehicles for flexible mobility. By concentrating cars onto a limited set of routes, more of the site becomes dedicated to safe, soft mobility, enhanced livability, safety, and social interaction. Restructure how people move and interact on the site. Layer 3, points. Beyond the existing and the added housing units, new amenities organized as LMS and linear elements are introduced as points across the reorganized field. These include green spaces, recreation and sport areas, public gathering spaces, community-oriented programs, and small retail. Rather than isolated nodes, the points form a hierarchy of uses and spatial conditions. Together, they generate a diversified network of everyday convenience and social opportunities, supporting a more active and livable environment for students. This toolkit, Pilot for Integrated Livability-Oriented Transformation, can be applied to many campus tissue sites across Ann Arbor, places where the tension between student life and monofunctional residential zone persists, especially under conditions of limited mobility. Through this layered system, mobility and livability can finally be restored. We believe that through this approach, we can begin to build a true student city.
Thank you for the presentations. And so now we'll have an opportunity for any of the commissioners to ask any questions or to offer any comments. So let me see if I can see everybody. Yeah. Change my view. Okay, great. We'll start with Commissioner Dish.
Thank you. I'm going to lower my hand so I don't forget. These were all very good. Definitely the second one was a little harder to understand, but visually I followed it. And so I just wanted to say that I found them all really inspiring, and I saw sort of connected strategies across them. So one of the ones, the one that also jumped out a bit most for me is presentation number 3, because I was having a tough time when we were talking about the land use categories of figuring out how the R4 neighborhoods that look so much like suburban subdivisions could ever turn into anything interesting. And you really put a kind of connected, I would say urban, but that's not, but you made a connectedness overlay in that, which was really inspiring to me, because you showed me how a thing that I think of as organized in a very typical suburban way could turn into more like a grid. And so, and you did a similar thing with North Sky. You were going after a different thing in that one. You were going after a relationship to stormwater, but you did a similar thing. So I'm really interested in these ideas. And so do you, I guess with the third one, it's still pretty isolated from Central Campus and the center of Ann Arbor itself. And so I wondered, is it what else needs to happen so that, it looked like a much more livable neighborhood after you were done stripping it and stuff, but it's still kind of isolated. I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
So hi, I'm Joyce, and through this semester, we look in deeply into the actor action network and kind of figure out that there are two, with the limitation of mobility of students, there are only 2 strategies that we can do. One is like add more mobility, that in our intervention, we try to add like some share cars and zip cars, like with the massive parking spaces. If the massive parking spaces can be rented to a shared car company, maybe students don't really need to have a car in order to have the mobility. On the second hand, maybe with the more shared cars, there might be more people willing to move a little bit further away, and that also creates a potential of higher population move using some type of public transportation. So on the other hand is the monofunction that keeps the students limited without with moving, because like if we can get everything inside one block, you don't really need to move far away to get groceries in the big box grocery stores. Instead of if it's just doable by walking, it will be all right. So in our intervention, we try to make it more with more different function and more spatial hierarchy in order to create a more livable type for student, especially student without car. I don't have a car, so I highly rely on buses systems. And yeah, in our intervention, I think the solution we propose is to the mobility part are the shared transportation systems in with is instead of like just parking and private cars.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee. Thank you, Commissioner Dish, for kicking us off.
All right, thank you. This is great. Thank you so much. It's very also brave to share your work with us. We really appreciate it. One of the first things that I'll say is that I actually love the subtitles. It makes it really accessible for folks that may not be able to his listen. So I thought that was a great touch. Really loved all three of these. I'm going to start with North Sky. I'm trying to think about how it may apply to zoning, right? The use of stormwater regulations is generally done at the Washtenaw County level. And I'm trying to think through, could there be carrots or incentives for faster reviews if there's greater common area planning? And you know, obviously we've always talked about this is Scott Campbell's triangle, right? Economic feasibility, social justice, environmental sustainability. And I can see the developer. I actually think you should go work for North Sky and design the next one. But I can see them saying, well, hey, it may cost a lot more for us to try to program, you know, boulders and things that site. But I think those things need to be explored at the development phase, right? And so I'm just thinking about what could the Planning Commission do to encourage more of that and what kind of carrots may exist? But I thought it was a great concept to explore. So it was very much appreciated that. The other one on universities, I like the pun, that was great. And the thing that I will just point out, so the university is a state constitutional entity that isn't beholden to zoning or city regulations. So I think, and the university does a lot to try to engage and, you know, work together. But you may want to tell your administrators, hey, we would love for you to enter into a development agreement with the city. But just be aware and recognize that the university acts as kind of its state entity. So it kind of supersedes local level regulations. So would love to see more coordination. So I love that you call that out. But yeah, we would obviously as a city planning commission love to see that. So, and then the last one, yeah, I love the concept of elasticity, the campus tissue, etc. So overall, I really appreciated it. I hope that Professor Quellar gives you good grades and that you finish up with finals well. So thank you. Really appreciated it.
Wow, you got an endorsement for a good grade. You didn't know that you were signing up for that. Other commissioners with comments, questions, or reflections. Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Thank you. Thank you guys for this for these three presentations. This was great. I really like the format too, having the video. I think similar to Councilmember Dish, I was really struck by the interventions. I'm always thinking about the implementation of ideas. I'm very familiar with I actually lived at North Star when I first moved to Ann Arbor and we were renovating our house. So it's interesting because I never would have thought of it as like campus tissue, which is a weird word to use. Sorry, guys. But I think in listening, especially to that one, I think like not just for areas that are considered more student housing, but like every neighborhood in Ann Arbor that is sort of an existing neighborhood could benefit from some sort of reorganization. Like we're going to need to think more about redevelopment and reuse of some of these built out areas if we want to, you know, make them more livable as you guys have presented, because we just don't have a lot of, you know, land to just start from scratch and build how we think we need to build. So I'm curious, and maybe this is a question for your professor, is there an audience that you're going to share these things with? You know, like that North Sky neighborhood, like those stormwater interventions were really cool. Like somebody could actually, some neighborhood HOA could take that and implement, or is this again, I'm always thinking about implementation. So just curious if this is going to be shared like more broadly, or if this is just sort of like held to the class and then us.
I mean, it's yes, absolutely. Would love to connect with any audience who is interested. So if you have suggestions, we would love
Well,
to
so
connect.
the students, I'm guessing, chose the neighborhoods on their own. It wasn't like clients or
No.
okay. I mean, you should just unsolicited like send these videos out to the people that sort of like manage these neighborhoods because I mean, they could be interested. But this was
This
a really
yeah.
cool presentation.
This Saturday at the farmers market, we'll be showing more student work. So if you're interested,
Oh, very
come
cool.
by the
All
farmers
right.
market.
Awesome. Thank you.
Commissioner Hammersmith, you hit on part of why I wanted to bring these presentations after I observed them, and I saw a different version. I didn't actually see the video. They've actually changed them quite a bit since the presentation that I saw. And even there, I was struck by especially the stormwater use. I know Commissioner Lee already noted that that's at the county level, but every development has to address stormwater in the city of Ann Arbor. And so part of what I was hoping for is what you have identified as just that spark of, oh, this is a very different approach to how we think about this. And then maybe that creates something in our own work plan or in our direction as a planning commission for how we help developers sort of tackle some of these things. Other commissioners? All right.
You want to say something?
I'll just turn it back to the students for a moment to see if you have any questions for the Planning Commission. And then with that, we would thank you for sharing your presentations with us. Thank you for, because I know it took a lot of work, not only to do your first set of presentations, which I observed, but then to create these videos to make it accessible to us for our work session tonight. So I'll just turn it back to you all to see if you had any questions or final thoughts.
So hi everyone again, it's the Stormwater team. We actually wanted to just highlight, as you mentioned, what we wanted to work was on two different parts. One was retrofitting whatever developments are already existing in Ann Arbor, because a lot of part of the city is already built. We believed that it was important to retrofit what was already existing. And the other part of the solution was to provide a model for future developments, as you guys noticed. So in the retrofitting one, we realized that, as you mentioned, all the developers have this pre-requirement that they have to address stormwater, but they end up just making a pond, a retention pond out of it, because that's the easiest and cheapest solution. The city unified code does mention a lot of ways where the stormwater could be addressed, but not many people follow that. They just make a pond. We would actually wanted to propose that if there could be sterner actions taken or more rules that make compulsory some of the uh, interventions made compulsory for developers to follow, such as having a rain garden and not having a manicured lawn, which was our major concern. And another thing was the runoff to be infiltrated in the ground on its way and not being dumped into a pond. I think that was our major aim for the entire design. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we have a commissioner, Commissioner Norton.
Just to say, I think a lot of what I was struck by your stormwater work as well, and even in all of the presentations, how it got filtered in. You ought to go think about presenting this work to the Huron River Watershed Council. If you haven't already, go show it to them and the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner, and then city staff. I don't know, Hank, if they've met with Jennifer Lawson yet or something, but they might all be interested in seeing what you've got, especially the North Star. I don't remember the name of the place. You had some really nice graphic illustrations of what it could be, which was much more enticing to me and attractive than what it seems to be, what it currently is. So I think all three of those groups would be quite interested in seeing your work. So you might give some thought to trying to reach out to them.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thanks again for adding this at the end of your semester. Thank you for joining us during your study time. We appreciate the work that you've done in our city to help reimagine how we can approach development, land use, as well as water integration. And as Commissioner Lee already noted, we hope that you get good grades and you have a anxiety-free end of your semester as you head into the holidays, should you be celebrating any of them. So thanks again for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Great. So with that, I see that Manager Kelly has already promoted our next presenters who are going to share with us a briefing memo on best practices around comprehensive land use and plans, and then post-planning with some zoning recommendations. So we have two professors from the University of Michigan, Professor Noah Kazis. Hopefully I got that right, Noah. I'm sorry if I didn't. I will talk to you offline to get the best pronunciation later. And then Professor Jonathan Levine from the Urban Planning School at the University of Michigan. And Noah is a law professor at the university. So I am going to turn it over to the two of you. I believe you have a presentation that you are going to share with us, and it is not a video. So hopefully this will go better. And then after the presentation, we'll have time for commissioner comments, questions, and dialogue. And then I want to acknowledge that principal planner for the comprehensive land use plan, planner Michelle Bennett, is here and is joining us for this part of our conversation, since it has to do with the comprehensive land use. With that, I believe Professor Levine, you are running the presentation, or you all are co-presenting, so I will turn it over to the two of you.
So I think I'll start. I don't even have
Great.
a presentation, and lawyers are Luddites, so we just like words on paper. So I send you a memo, and that's my preferred format, even more foolproof than a video. Well, first, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be starting to think about how the past work that you've done, feeds into the next short-term and long-term phases of this work. And that's really what sort of the memo is trying to think through, is what is the possible short-term timeline for implementation of some of the aspects of the comprehensive land use, the land use aspects of the comprehensive plan, assuming it moves forward. Obviously, the project of rezoning the city is a big one. It will take years. It will never actually be done, right? By the time you've finished, you've started over. So the question isn't really sort of like, how do you get everything done? But while you're doing whichever steps, feel are the ones you're sequencing, what can be done in the meantime, right? Is there a set of interim things that can be done on the zoning side? Should there be? Can there be? I think you all know the urgency as well as anybody, so I won't spend much time there, right? The reasons for the direction the plan is going are high stakes social issues, whether it is housing affordability, climate change, walkability, traffic crashes, the economic vitality of the city. And you don't get to go back in time once you figure out just what you want to do and have it kick in now, right? So if you want those benefits in the short term, you have to do the zoning to actually implement it. But I think that's preaching very much to the choir. I think the hard questions are, what can you do in the meantime? Since it's not everything. I see there as being sort of two sets of constraints on, sort of keeping you from just snapping your fingers and having the vision sort of materialize into a fully formed zoning code. Two very big constraints, right? One is, what do you still need to get public input on, whether sort of as a matter of getting local buy-in or local knowledge or all the other reasons you reach out to the public. And one is sort of the hard technical work of just putting pen to paper and making it work as a law, right? It is an interconnected set of provisions. And both of those just seem superable. not on everything, but on some things. Uh, there's really a long tradition of doing this. Usually rezonings over the last 100 years have gone in the other direction, right? You're trying to downzone. And so what cities do is they say, well, we're going to downzone much of the city for many of the uses. In the meantime, just don't build anything, right? That's totally standard. It goes back to the Standard Zoning Enabling Act in 1926, that kind of interim zoning. But it's the same idea, which is we don't want any harms to happen while we figure out just how the machine is going to work. And you can do the same thing, right? Which is the harms that you're concerned about that, we talked about at the beginning. You can also try and mitigate many of those harms while you figure out just what you want the machine to do. So going to those two kinds of constraints, public participation, uh, there are things the land use outreach plan did not speak to, but there's a lot that it did. And I think that it's worth recognizing that the years of work are probably the most robust kind of public outreach the city gets on any topic, period. Right? Most local laws do not take 2 years, 2.5 years of public comment. They don't have that kind of charrette, followed by hearings, followed by more hearings, followed by drafts, followed by drafts. Right? It's really robust. You did an amazing, hard thing. And you can incorporate that, and other cities do, right? So it's best practices is not, I think, quite how I'd frame this because the state frameworks for the relationship between planning and zoning are so varied that it's actually pretty hard to generalize, right? There's many different systems that people are operating within, but it is totally standard to say, that's the really good outreach. That's where we got what we really needed. And that's going to last us not just for a few months, but a few years worth of outreach, right? So Minneapolis, for instance, is still using the outreach that it did in its, long-term comprehensive planning process as basically all the public outreach that it wants for all of the sequential zonings that have been implementing that. They might ask, they have to go through their statutory processes, of course, but like they're not doing sort of a big new charrette type process. They're just doing the minimum because they've already got what they need. And I think that's true here, right? I mean, we had street signs on every block. There was a newspaper coverage. There were packed hearings. Like, I think this was a really robust civic conversation, and you can use that. You can rely on that. The harder part to me is the sort of technical stuff, right? What can you do now without getting wrapped up in, each individual use by each individual zone, right? All the details, what are you going to do about signs? What are you going to do about hard work needs to be done, right? But you don't want to let the tail wag the dog. And it strikes me that the comprehensive planning process really resolved a few things, and you can just figure out how to put those into legally operative language. The most important one is the map, right? You have a detailed map that can guide many of the decisions, especially where hub and where transition go. Hub being, I think, easier, frankly. I've seen lots of comprehensive plans that basically look like three concentric circles, right? Like core, medium, low, and it just looks like three donuts. That's not the map that you produced, right? There's little zigs and little zags that go probably not quite to the individual parcel level, but pretty close, right? So you've made the hardest choice, I think, in any zoning, which is where does the density go? And you've done that, right? You don't have to redo that except at the level of really implementation, which takes time, but it doesn't take years. And then the second thing that you've done is you've actually chosen a regulatory framework, right? So you're not reopening the door to saying, let's do switch from height to FAR, right? Like you basically said like we're sticking with a height-based framework with these sort of self-regulating, context-dependent height limits that Ann Arbor has innovated. You've set what the sort of maximum heights ought to be, not exactly how it steps up from the residential areas to the hub areas, but you've got the picture of sort of which tools you're using and how intensely you're using them. So there's, again, work to be done in sort of figuring out just what that means. And the transition feels like there's more work to be done. But those choices, sort of can be done on an interim basis while you do the more articulated version, right? You can take the map, expand D1 out basically to the hub and say that's not our perfect zone for the hub. It's not exactly what we're going for, but it's closer than our current zoning. It's a step in the right direction while we work. You can make text amendments that say, okay, what we wanted for residential areas includes this, or what we wanted for hub areas includes that. It's not exactly what we want, but it's closer to what we want than the status quo, and we'll figure out the hard things later. Yeah, I give some ideas for how to do it. I don't think those are especially important, actually, or good. You know the code better than I do. I'm much more in and out. Uh, I think what is important is to see that other cities can and do all the time just start immediately on the things where the hard choices have been made. And you can put off most, maybe not all, of the small choices for sort of a long-term incremental process where you go bite by bite. There are cities that do it the other way and say, we're going to do one big comprehensive rezoning. And I'd urge against that, not just because it's going to slow you down, take away from the urgency, not just because it's going to make you do all the work you just did a second time, but also because you don't get that comprehensiveness out of it necessarily, right? So Buffalo is one I was looking at for some other research, and they wrote a pretty amazing code in many ways, but immediately upon it being passed, they're just back having a controversy about granting too many variances because this or that or the other provision, 10 years into this long process, doesn't quite work, right? And that's normal, right? It's just like it's a constantly evolving document and constantly evolving process. But so you don't sort of have to aim for perfection because there's no hitting it. And I'd urge like a more incremental process. I think Jonathan has ideas on what one version of that might be, his preferred version. But I think my role, sort of as a lawyer and not a planner, is really just to say it's feasible.
Thank
Thanks,
you
no
for
thanks,
that.
Noah. Everybody hearing me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. There. And I believe you're seeing my screen now. Thanks very much for the invitation to come speak. Thanks for giving me a chance to meet virtually my colleague, Professor Cuellar, who I hadn't met, which is unconscionable, together with his wonderful students. So this has been great. One thing I tell my students, in all genuine honesty, is that the last 10 years have been the most exciting part of my career because things that I thought were never going to be possible in the planning field have become possible. Land use reforms, parking reforms that seemed stuck for decades, suddenly in the past 10 years seem to be feasible. And this is our opportunity now, opportunity of the city of Ann Arbor, which makes it personally for me doubly exciting. I don't have a single preferred option. I'd like to see if we can set out some alternatives, some principles, and then think about what possible options might match those alternatives, might match those principles. First principle in zoning, I think, always has to be health and safety. And in our case, we are areas that are zoned for industry are all intermixed with housing, even if housing isn't in those areas. They're very proximate. We can't tolerate hazards and nuisances. I think that has to be the first principle is that that's what we zone for. Second is housing abundance. That we all know the role of restrictive zoning in creating housing scarcity, and the principle should be seeking housing abundance, both in housing and in commercial space. Noah emphasized quick action with iteration. I strongly agree with that, meaning you don't have to get everything right the first time, and I want to specify some ways to begin without getting everything right the first time. I'm referring to it as a terraced approach. Actually, I got this from my friend Will Leaf. The terraced approach is starting with those land use categories that have the highest potential for generating abundance in housing and commercial areas, and together with the lowest political costs. And I believe it goes hub first, transition second, residential third. And I'd like to put some flesh on the bones of what might be a possible terraced approach. I'm calling this a principled rezoning process. I think we can start with a single zone for hub and transition, or one for hub and one for transition. So you might say, well, single zone, we have different kinds of areas in not necessarily in hub, but certainly in transition. How can we account for those areas if a single zone? And my direction here is to suggest that we can account for different areas even within a single zone. We've shown the way with our self-adjusting heights in T1. I think we can go a lot farther with rules that self-adjust, preferring that over drawing lines. Ultimately, we might have to draw lines, more lines, but this is the process that I might suggest to think about it first. Second, to develop zoning specifics for that future land use category based on the general principles in the comprehensive land use plan. It gives a lot of great direction and obviously needs specifics. Third step, develop self-adjusting text-based rules. Basically, I'm saying words first, lines second. Text-based rules to provide for different desired outcomes in that future land use category. And I'm going to talk in the next couple slides about the various dimensions of self-adjustingness. I think we can go really far with self-adjusting rules as opposed to a multiplicity of zones. Again, ultimately, we may well need more than a single zone for hub and more than a single zone for transition. But this is a process that I think we can go through first. Only where those text-based self-adjusting rules can't produce the desired results, that's when we create the new zone, and we do it with the minimum rules need to produce the desired outcome. So you might say, okay, how far can we go with self-adjusting? And the answer is, gosh, we have self-adjusting rules throughout our Unified Development Code. Obviously, the most prominent are the TC1 height limits. We determine setbacks by the average within 100 feet. That's a self-adjusting rule. We determine noise standards by average intensity. Fraternity sorority screening is a function of if you're a neighbor, single family or duplex. Wireless communication facilities setbacks, they're determined by tower heights. Mobile food vending services are excluded from site distance triangle requirements. We do this all the time. In other words, we create different rules for different areas, not necessarily by drawing new lines, but creating rules that adapt to the nature of the areas. When you look beyond Ann Arbor, you see lots of use of this. So in Washington, D.C., building heights tied to street widths. In Iowa City, setbacks are tied to building heights. In San Diego, setbacks are tied to lot widths. In Raleigh, sidewall heights are tied to neighboring wall planes. If you look abroad, now we all know that here in Ann Arbor, we are the leaders and the best. So we don't just look into the United States for our models, we look worldwide. Auckland, New Zealand has pioneered some quite innovative rules where using walking distances from downtown, walking distances from suburban downtowns, walking distances from transit as automatic guides to density. They've also developed angled planes from the street edge to determine building allowable building heights. There's lots and lots of stuff one can do with text rules before you start creating new zones. Why does this matter? First, I think we want to force ourselves to articulate the principle that's at work. I'll give you an example. In the previous slide, the screening on fraternity and sorority was when it's adjacent to single family or duplex. Okay, is that the principle that we actually adhere to? Do people in higher density residential also need screening? Because we have a rule, we can actually scrutinize the rule and say, does this align with our values? Second is we minimize the arbitrary line drawing and its associated politics. Every time you draw a line, it's very, very contentious. Third, we ensure consistency. Whenever the principle holds, the standards would kick in equally. And finally, some of these, not all of them, are linked to the built environment itself. If it's linked to the built environment itself, then there's an interesting principle that rule self-adjusts over time. So, for example, if setbacks shrink because average setbacks shrink, then the rule shrinks. Then the rule for the setbacks shrinks. So in other words, if we link to the built environment, we can actually have automatic change over time, which builds in flexibility. Okay, so if we accept this principle as a possibility, where do we start? Well, I think we can start with the columns, either one zone per category or one zone spanning two categories. So if when I read the comprehensive plan, I note that the higher density, a higher end of transition is pretty darn close to hub. So could be, for example, that one zone could span the higher end of transition and hub, or alternatively, maybe it's one zone for transition, one zone for hub. How do we get going? Looking at the columns, we can apply existing zones. For example, take a D1 zone or take a D2 zone, modify it and use it as a hub zone. Or we can develop custom-made zones. So alternatives A, B, C, and D, all of those are really good possibilities, good places to start. The main thing is what Noah said, which is get some facts on the ground. Do some rezonings, understand that it's going to be an iterative and a process, or what I've referred to as a terraced approach. So the principle is you can start with any of these, A, B, C, or D, extend the zone across hub and transition areas, modifying with the self-adjusting rules as necessary. You might say, well, we're looking, for example, for a different result along the corridors in transition than we are for the areas near hub. Fine. Can you do that with self-adjusting rules? I think you can. If you can't resolve the anomaly with self-adjusting rules, that's the time to develop a new zone. So start drawing lines. And repeat for residential, obviously with a more restrictive starting zone. Starting with a single zone limits the complexity of the reform, sets a baseline for other hub and transition zones. So we've talked about it. You can I'll skip over this, but you can take a look in the PowerPoint, which you have. We've talked about if you were to modify some existing zones, what would have to happen with those existing zones. So, for example, D2 might need to be renamed, might have some character overlays removed. TC1s might need to remove some maximum building widths, but the existing zones are a reasonable starting point because we know how they work. We would need to modify them to be consistent with the plan. To create the new district, again, we've developed some ways of thinking about creating that new district and spreading the new district for as much of each area, hub and transition, as you possibly can, while using the self-adjusting rules. Finally, I want to pass it back to Noah to talk about heavy industrial uses.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't have much to say here. My understanding is this has sort of come up as a place where complications are being felt. And I think what I would just try and emphasize is there are ways to make it not that complicated, or there are ways to just put off the controversy. And either one seems okay by me. And with a big asterisk, I know there are legal questions here, or I've heard through the grapevine there are legal questions here, and I'm not giving any legal advice. I've been asked not to give any legal advice, not prepared to give any legal advice. Uh, um, uh, but just sort of practically, conceptually, right? One is U of M, so that's easy to kick the can on. Um, and then the other, right? One option is just to say we're not going to rezone that area. It has particular needs. That seems totally fine. It's not the core of the city. It's not a huge geography. Another is to say we're maintaining sort of current uses, but we're also allowing the other things that the plan would call for, and we'll let the market work it out, right? I'm not actually all that concerned that we're going to get, a tannery along North Main Street, right? I think that if you allowed housing there, you'd probably just get housing, and it would sort of work itself out market-wise. But those strike me as two sort of easy things to do, to either just do nothing or to make the important but relatively small change of expanding the use categories in line with what's in the plan. Um, I think it's like actually just a perfect example of what's the tail and what's the dog, right? This is important, but it's the tail.
All right. Well, thank you for that presentation. I have some questions, but as chair, I don't get to go first. So, who would like to kick us off? We'll start with Commissioner Adams.
I don't have any questions. I loved and I really appreciate Professor Casas and Levine. I appreciate you putting these documents together, and I also tend to think and digest information in memo format, so I appreciated the memo as well. There were a few things that I teased out of the documents when I was doing my pre-read that I think are important and persuasive for me. I appreciated the fact that the memo um, highlighted how our current land use laws and regulations are actively causing harm to the community. We often talk about a housing crisis, but I appreciated the pretty sharp point that the memo put on that concept as a way of making the argument that we need to, if we can reduce those harms quickly, it's imperative that we do so. I think that those judgments are reflected in other documents, but having that pulled out and stated in those terms, I think is important, and it's correct. Second, the policy recommendations, some of the policy recommendations in the draft plan, I don't think are ripe for immediate execution. But as the memo points out, some of them are, or at least far more shovel ready, to use a developer term, than others. And it fairly persuasively makes the case that Hub might be that category, to me anyway. I don't know that Hub was specifically called out. Well, I think it was in one of the two documents, or perhaps both, but I walked away from reading the documents thinking Hub is a fairly discrete policy issue that the plan tackles with the sort of specificity that might make it right for fast execution. The other thing that residential, I think there's our public engagement probably supports the proposition that we need to tackle that with a little more care and process maybe. My thoughts aren't settled on that. Transition, the tapering mechanism, and some other things that have to be hammered out. I'm not fully settled on that one either, but the hub district seems like low-hanging fruit. And again, we're tackled with a lot of process, a lot of specificity, and feel pretty ready for execution. Assuming, of course, that we're talking about a draft. We still have a few months of public engagement left, but speaking about the document as if it might become final in some form that looks substantially like the one that we have, Hub looks sort of more ready than the other ones. Fast tracking Hub, and this wasn't pointed out in the memo, but I was thinking about it as I was reading it. It frees up time and resources to tackle the other two. To the extent that we think the other two merit more time, more resources, more public engagement, that's limited. Those resources are limited. So if we can take Hub and chop it out and say, all right, that's an area where we think we can move fast and without a lot of work, we should try to do that. Third, I really appreciated that the memo pointed out how possible this is, given that there are peer and non-peer cities that have implemented short-term zoning changes either immediately following or even contemporaneously with the passage of a plan, and have piggybacked the public engagement conducted in connection with that plan to support the execution of the actual changes to the code. I noted the memo noted historically that this sort of speed is far more commonly used for the creation of new restrictions on housing than it has been to make it easier to build housing. But that sort of procedural status quo bias has no legal or policy justification that I'm aware of. And we also know that our current rules aren't working for Ann Arbor residents. So we don't have any reason to prefer them, and we don't have any reason to subject future hypothetical rules to a level of scrutiny that the current rules would fail. So yeah, if the plan is again approved in substantially the form as it exists today, I'd love to see and consider a proposal to fast track some type of Hub execution, either as a text amendment, as a map amendment, or as a combination of the two, to the extent that it can be done in the short term. And that's where it's high value. We've talked a lot over the last year about where the housing creation is. It's in the Hub districts, and I'd really love to see that done sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Dish.
Thank you both. Oh, let me lower my hand because I'll forget later. Thank you both for your work, and thank you, Commissioner Adams, for your comments because it makes it really easy for me to jump in. And I want to, Commissioner Adams highlighted the takeaway that he took from both, which was for sure to fast track Hub. I took away the same point and feel pretty strongly about that. And I'm sure I can't speak at all as a person who knows anything about how hard it is to move from plan to implementation. But your two presentations made me feel that there are ways that we could simplify it for ourselves. What I took as a big difference between the advice that the two of you offered was Professor Kazis, you underscored that you said it several times actually, transition needs a little more work. Transition needs a little more work. And that has been something that we have felt on the commission, that a lot is, transition is a grab bag. And so it's not as bad as the concentric circle model that you describe, but I do think the question of where and when and how it tapers, how it self-adjusts, and that it would absolutely need to self-adjust along multiple dimensions. And I felt really illuminated, Professor Levine, from the way that you talked about the multiple dimensions on which things can self-adjust, because I always think about height and then I worry about setbacks and stuff. But what you said was very reassuring and illuminating there. So I guess I wonder if after you've heard a round of comments from commissioners, if the two of you might be willing to speak to each other in a way about when Professor Levine suggested you could do one zone with transition and Hub, my stomach sort of dropped a bit. And I felt like that didn't jive entirely with Professor Kazis' advice. So that is my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Dish. Other commissioners. Commissioner Weatherby.
So one of the things that I struggle with is when we talk about the sort of self-adjusting rules is we're really talking about them, I think, primarily between kind of zones, whatever that I'm using the term zone loosely, maybe a zoning code, maybe text. um, and and yet our built environment might look different. So it might be a transition or hub area, but be single family homes. And so this is just something that, we keep saying to people where there's going to be just self-adjusting rules between residential and transition, but you might not be able to tell but is that between, the built environment now or between what we've designated as, and and so this, sort of both these comments have really made me think even more about that of like, if we do a lot of self-adjusting, and maybe this isn't appropriate to ask this question as a question, maybe it's just something sort of as a thought of like, how do you do self-adjusting? Do you do self-adjusting rules based on what the built environment looks like? Or do you do self-adjusting rules based on what the potential or the new zoning code or however we designate it looks like? And and that's something that I've really struggled with and maybe that's probably primarily in a transition area or transition next to hub, but like how do we deal with something like that, especially in the kind of do no harm sort of area of like saying to people, hey, I know you live in a neighborhood of all single family homes, but we've designated as a hub. And don't worry, it's going to be self-adjusting, but from what to what? And that's just something that I think it feels like the words are easy and the words on paper are easy, but in the actual lived built environment, it gets really complicated.
Thank you, Commissioner Weatherby. You posed it as a question, and then you said, "I don't know if
Well,
it's
I'm posing
appropriate
it
to
as a
ask it as a
question, but I don't
question."
know
But I think we're in a work session, and Manager Kelly can correct me and rein me in. But I mean, we are here; they are here. If you want to pose it as a question,
I mean,
you
I
can
will
hear
pose
what
it
they
as a
thought.
question, but I
Okay,
will not
great.
be offended if there is not a.
Okay, great. So it is a question, professors.
So I'll respond to both Commissioner, Councilmember Dish and Commissioner Weatherby. On the one zone, let me clarify what I meant when I said one zone. Clearly, there will be more than one zone between hub and transition. I suspect there will probably be more than two zones. The one zone option is the starting point. So one might say, okay, there's hub, and there's the areas of transition that are adjacent to hub and are designated for very high density development. They could be in the same zone. In other words, the zone could span those two categories of hub and transition. Or alternatively, one could start with the lines of hub and the lines of transition and say, okay, let's start with the zone for each. But no, I don't think that the end result will be a single zone for hub and transition. Commissioner Weatherby, on the topic of self-adjusting, what we have in our code is both. We have self-adjusting based on zoning lines, so that would be TC1 as an example, and we have self-adjusting based on the built environment. That would be some of the other examples I put up, for example, setback requirements. So I wanted to point out that there are lots of tools, and if we look, we have plenty in our own zoning code, and if we look beyond our zoning code, gosh, there's a panoply of tools of linking to either the built environment or to zoning lines themselves. So one way of thinking about this is saying, thinking about an area, what is the result we're hoping to reach for that area? Can we reach that result through a set of self-adjusting rules? Maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is actually this. Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry, lost power for a sec. Maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is notwithstanding the many, many self-adjusting rules that we have to choose from, the quirkiness of this particular area is such that we need to draw lines, created as a separate zone. All I'm suggesting is that maybe doesn't need to be the first option. That can be, once we say, gosh, we've really tried with our self-adjusting rules, we can't get the results that we're looking for. I think that's when we know that it's time to draw a new zone.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just add, in response to Councilmember Dish's question and sort of invitation for us to disagree with each other? I think that's right. I think that's insightful that there's a little gap between how we see this. But I think that what they share is their efforts to say, how do you find something that you can do simple and first? And they're two different approaches. I, speaking only for myself at this moment, like I couldn't tell you what's actually easiest and fastest because that's going to depend to some extent on you and on council and on the public and on, sort of the inevitable like technical wrinkle you find while putting pen to paper, right? So I think it's trying to get things that are appealing options on the table and hope that one of them actually appeals. Right. So my memo sort of more emphasized starting with what's existing and making enough modifications to get something that looks like what's in the plan. And Commissioner Adams is right. The hub's the place to do that easiest, fastest, and for other reasons first, market reasons. Right. Professor Levine's model, I think, is we can set up a relatively simple type of zone that then extends more broadly, and then we'll tinker from there. But they're the same sort of ethos, but they are different in that respect. They're two different kinds of fast and interim, I think. I also would really echo what he said. There's parts of transition where the fuzziness feels very acute, and there's parts of transition where it really doesn't. Right. The parts that are big chunks of transition near a lot of hub, where the plan says treat them a lot like hub. There's nothing they're really transitioning down to in such close proximity. Uh, Strike me as amenable to much faster action than like the long radial spokes, where I don't really know just off the face of the document exactly what the vision is, or they're sort of both more, I think, figuring out what it is the city wants, whether the city means the public, the commission, the council, right? And also more work to do turning that into sort of text, operative text. But in those like big chunks of orange, I think it was orange, that seems much more doable in a pretty timely manner, right? So to Commissioner Adams' point, I think hub is most shovel ready, but there's parts of transition I'd shove in with hub.
Thank you. Other commissioners?
Chair Weiss, do you mind if Ms. Bennett offers some reflections on the present topic?
I do not mind. I mean, I have a couple comments. How do you see that flowing? You just want her to jump in now because of where we are in the conversation?
Yeah.
Great. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I wanted to just remind the Planning Commission that we are still waiting for some results from several studies that our engineers are conducting regarding water and sanitary, which I believe is going to show that we have massive constraints with our current infrastructure. So while I agree that I think in many ways, Hub would be a good place to start, And that's where staff is already starting to think about these things of how are we going to tackle this UDC rewrite. It's a huge task. I would say one thing that I'm thinking about is that while we might be able to get words on the paper and lines on the map for the hub, the actual development capacity could be severely constrained, and we just don't know the answers to that yet. So I don't know where that leaves us, where to start or not, but I just wanted to make sure that if you remember in the summer, I believe they came and talked to us about their studies and some of their preliminary findings. They're still working on that. So there are some things to consider that even if the zoning allows for it, that the development just might not be able to happen because of that
Thank you.
without serious investment. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
I just want to ask a follow-up. I anticipate that, and I'm anticipating that based on some of the comments that staff made over the summer when we talked about water capacity constraints. I can't remember what was the date of that presentation, but just so I'm clear, and so the record we're creating here is clear, my preference for moving fast on the legal changes where we can, where it's appropriate, is that if the water constraints end up as the constraint, then and the development bumps into the water constraint as the constraint, then the development won't proceed, and that's understood. But right now, the development's bumping into the law before it even gets to the water constraint. And if the law is bad and not the right law, I want to change it. And our purview is that piece of the equation. So I'm not missing anything, right? We do have a constraint that will be handled at a different stage of the process, the permitting process associated with the development. But what we allow in the zoning is, in many respects, if not all respects, a different question.
That's correct. Everything you said, I agree with. I just know in a lot of our research, we've been reading about how transition and hub are the areas that other cities have found the most impact, right, on the housing supply, because when they upzoned it, they were able to get much larger development, and that while we can change our code to allow that, that there is then something else that might prohibit it. But yes, what we are tasked with is writing it, and so if that's how we choose to proceed, that also makes sense. I'm just wanting to remind you all of some other things that will come up during this process.
Okay. Thank you. Other commissioners. I actually have a question for staff vis-a-vis this presentation that we've heard, which was, is it like a correct framing that when Planner DeLeo rejected the developer conditions on the dean that were somewhat related to the character overlay, does that fit what the professors have been presenting to us tonight? Sort of some of the removal of some of like the character overlays and some of those restrictions? Like, do those things match? Am I thinking about those correctly?
I think where Planner DeLeo was coming from, and we talk about this often, is that having a la carte constraints based on a particular site are very challenging to piece together. And if this particular development were not to be built and they sell the land, the condition remains. So it's not a very tidy way of moving forward, and also it presumes that maybe there is a challenge or something incorrect about the underlying zone, and that our preference is to just regulate by our UDC standards without having these customized items that run with the property, which have to be combed through. We have to track those documents. So there's an administrative angle that I think is, and just having flexibility to change how we regulate within the greater downtown area that isn't necessarily speaking to we want to scrap our overlays, but that's a conversation that is a follow-on to how we would treat hub and how we would move forward with these categories.
And
Does that
then
answer your question?
I think so. Thank you for the clarity there. And I think as a follow-on, my follow-on question from the presentation to sort of what we are seeing um, with regard to the self-adjustment sort of rules, like these text amendments. So I think the first thing I wanted to note was I found it helpful to hear both of the professors talk about the flexibility that's already sort of present in our UDC. And I just want to sort of level set that and make sure that I heard that correctly, and sort of set that as a guiding principle, because when I met with Planner Bennett and Planner DeLeo to talk about this very acute issue around how transition abuts either residential or hub, one of the things Planner DeLeo noted for me is like, we've spent a decade making the UDC a better document, both as a table of contents, but then also as a framework. And so, one, I just want to acknowledge, I want to verify that I'm hearing correctly that the UDC in and of itself is a good framework for us to do the work that we need to do. So we are not looking necessarily to rewrite or scrap the whole UDC, because that feels really big and long and challenging. So I'll stop there. I won't add any more. I just want to level set that, and then I'll make my next comment question. And staff or the professors can clarify, like, did I hear you correctly?
It for sure is a good framework. It for sure gives us a lot of tools. Uh, I I I would like for the city to take seriously the direction of council to vastly reduce the number of zones. I mentioned Auckland, New Zealand. They went from 99 to 6, and that's a city of one region of 1.5 million, and they did it largely through self-adjusting rules. So yes, we have the tools, but I do think that we need to limit the proliferation or the crazy quilt of zones.
Sure. And I don't think there's any disagreement at the table or even among the planners that the goal is to reduce the number of zones. I think the maybe the challenge is to what number. And I have been consistent in my let there be only one zone. And you even said that tonight. So I hope no one assumed that I paid you or asked you to do that. So we'll let Manager Kelly respond, because you came off mic.
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that I think there are those sort of two loose directions that we could work within the framework that we have and make significant and maybe potentially faster progress, which is the ideas that you all are considering and holding up to the light and considering tonight together, versus a clean sheet redesign is very time consuming. Of course, it does prolong a lot of things. So there's different tracks. One is more expensive. One if you do more things in house, then we'll have to consider what our staff capacity is. So, but the UDC could be modified as is. It could be adjusted. We could reduce our zones and tweak them within our existing framework. That is absolutely something that we're still considering internally. We don't have a preferred option that we're sharing. We're not even necessarily, prepared to present on these things tonight. We're happy to participate in the conversation with you all. But yeah, I think that your takeaways were correct from that conversation.
Thank you so much. Let me check in with other commissioners before I continue to talk. And then since we got a little later start, I do want to extend slightly past 9 o'clock if there is enough conversation for it. If not, we'll wrap up as soon as we can. Other commissioners? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Abrams.
I don't have a lot to add other than what's already been said. I just wanted to extend some gratitude to both of you for preparing these materials. I found it really helpful and interesting, and it makes me feel excited about the possibility, like thinking creatively about implementation as opposed to maybe the general tenor around it for the past year has been this kind of ominous and overwhelming decades long slog. And, I think at least our recent experience with TC1 is that it did take quite a long time. And it took years to write the zone and then to rezone those parcels, literally years. Right? I don't think I'm exaggerating there, 2, maybe 3 years. So I think just the suggestion that there might be some other ways to approach this, and also the ethos, let's say, of not sacrificing the good for the sake of the perfect. No, the perfect for the sake of the good. You know what I'm saying? Like that it will never be perfect, right? But there are things we can do that are good enough to kind of get us going. And then we understand it's always a living thing, which we will constantly be changing and updating. So I just appreciate that reminder and that direction. And just, yeah, really appreciative of the time you took to put it together and to come here. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Abrams. Other commissioners? I have just 2 more things, and then we'll have our public comment. So I think one thing I heard tonight was trying to rules that adapt to use. And I just wanted to make sure I captured that and I heard that correctly. And I think that might have been from you, Jonathan. So if you wanted to just give me one more sentence on that, but put it in the context of the self-adjusting rules between the zones and the built environment. I think the biggest tension that I'm experiencing as I engage in conversations, especially with residents who are looking at the map, which you have noted is helpful for our process. So it's either the zone, the zones or and the land use or the map. And what I'm hearing from folks is because there's not specificity around what that's going to look like, it's creating a sense of anxiety. And I know that our task is not to allay anxiety, but anything that we can do to help people trust the process that we're engaging in, I think is helpful ultimately for the work that we have in front of us. And so I just wanted to understand just another sentence or two on rules that adapt to use. I think I fully understand it in the way that we talked through TC1 in terms of it's self-adjusting, and then I thought it was helpful for you to talk through the fraternities and the screening and that type of thing. But yeah, just like a sentence or two there, and then I think that is it for me.
So I would say there are rules that adjust based on attributes of the built environment or attributes of the zoning code itself. So TC1 adjusts based on attributes of the zoning code, where the line is between residential and other, or attributes of the built environment. That would be the case of the setbacks. Let's see, how do you convince people? I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. A map is worth 1,000 words. A 3D representation of what is feasible under various rules is worth 10,000 words. So one can experiment with different rules. Let's think about, for example, the corridors in transition. Clearly, there's going to be an issue with height in the corridors in transition. I presume there's also going to be an issue with setbacks in corridors in transition. I suspect those 2 dimensions are very readily handleable through rules, proximity rules to residential zone, setbacks, some rule based on, well, we actually already do it based on average setbacks, but maybe we're looking to ultimately incrementally shrink setbacks. So one could set the rule based on average minus, for example. So by linking to either the zoning code, attributes of the zoning code itself, or attributes of the built environment, I think we can test out and see what is possible in different areas and see if it aligns with our visions for the areas.
Okay, thank you. All right, last call, commissioners. Staff?
I had a thought that was related to easy implementability, and the more, let me just say that the average setbacks are a frequent source of challenge for both applicants and also on occasion the staff. So I think again that some things that may sound good in idea form can, as we're trying to make our city development friendly and also make our regulations straightforward and easy to interpret, that I would just offer. It is also very, very valuable to have less calculations and easy, straightforward rules that are not dependent on GIS or extensive measurements, etc. Although it is possible, in practice, this can be something that is not always development friendly and not always as quick, and it does lead to the not as specifically that, but those kinds of things can lead to a lot of upfront consultation and extensive interpretation assistance from the
And
municipality.
if I could just comment, and then Noah, you can go. The Would you say that the implementation of the TC1 in the Arbor South would be sort of like an example of what you are getting at? Because we had to do several iterations there and then we had to amend it. Or are you thinking of something that is less complicated than that? Manager
Was
Brown.
that directed to me?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
I think that the changes to TC1 were more of the growing pain of an aspirational district, and then also trying to tailor that to a a development that isn't necessarily a cookie cutter variety for what was in mind when the zone was created. It was a unique site, a very large site, and I think that those were factors in the request to update the zone, but many of them did make the zone easier to implement. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
was just thinking of like the street wall. Like I felt like we had a very long conversation about like the length of that. And so as I was hearing you talk about the difference between having a line that you can just point someone to as opposed to a calculation that you have to do with a developer, when you were preferring it, that's where my mind went. So I wasn't sure if that was the
Yes.
framework that you were thinking through, or
That
if
is
that would be a helpful
that is
framework for
part of the
me.
kind of thing that I
Yeah.
am thinking of. We actually
Oh no.
of these kinds of um, calculations are what are causing multiple review rounds.
Yeah, and I think it'll be helpful for us to get that feedback from staff as we engage in whatever the implementation process is, because I think for me that it's absent because we're not getting that iterative work product being presented to us. We're getting a final product, and then sometimes we'll have some conversation at the table about, oh, this took several rounds to do that, but it's not always legible. So as we move forward in the process, if staff could help us by elucidating some of those challenges, I think we can look at those side by side with some of the things that we might imagine as we try to implement the plan should it pass. All right, Noah.
Yeah, thanks. I really just wanted to follow up on that because I think it's critical, and Commissioner Abrams' related point. Um, you can right after a comprehensive planning is a great moment to do the blank sheet thinking, but it isn't an interim approach, right? Like those are two different tracks, and it's sort of valuable to keep the like, we're rethinking it, we're bringing new approaches, we're radically simplifying. That takes a while because you inevitably introduce a tool that needs another round of ironing out, which maybe the development community doesn't understand or what have you, right? Like something happens, and it does take years. It just does. So if the goal is to have something good enough for a few years, I I think you have to start with something you know works. You don't have to do it line by line, right? You can say, we know this zone kind of works, and we're gonna bump up the height, bump down the, well, whatever, right? Like, but the basic framework is functional uh, in terms of both what the market needs, what people can understand, what staff can implement in any kind of feasible way, right? Like, you know just by working with the code every day and working with applications which those are and which those aren't. Um, and I just sort of hold up the value of both of those tracks, but not try and do them at the same time, right? The radical simplification or brand new ideas is just a hard to make compatible with sort of a preliminary interim set of short-term fixes. It's not impossible, but they're pretty different instincts, and I think that the caution that we just heard is exactly why.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for joining us tonight. Thank you, as Commissioner Abrams said, for the work product that you shared with us and giving us just a new tool in our tool belt for how we would imagine implementing the plan should it pass and conclude all of its statutory processes.
Thank you
With
for having
that,
us.
yeah, absolutely. With that, we will move to our final public comment. I do see that we have participants. If any of you would like to address the commission, you need to raise your hand and staff will identify you and you'll have 3 minutes to address the commission. I see no hands raised. Do you concur, Manager Kelly? Great. With that, I will adjourn our work session. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for enduring the technical difficulties at the beginning, and we will see you next week at 5:30 for our regular meeting in council chambers. Have a good weekend, everyone.